Welcome to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable, where we give you the inside look at the week's top headlines. My name is Leo Shane. I'm Capitol Hill Bureau Chief. With me are a panel of our experts, Andrew Tillman, our Executive Editor, Megan Myers, our Pentagon Bureau Chief, and Howard Altman, our Managing Editor. Thank you all for being here. Let's jump over to Afghanistan, a place where there still are quite a few U.S. troops and U.S. forces. This week, we saw that U.S. Officials presented a new draft peace agreement to the Taliban and Afghan government there, potentially carving out a way to end the nearly 20-year-old war. Andrew, talk about where this stands, and are we ever actually going to get to the point where U.S. forces come out of that country?
Yeah, well, President Trump in his final weeks had set a May 1st deadline for a withdrawal of all American troops from Afghanistan, something that a lot of people at the Pentagon were not really supportive of. And there was a lot of uncertainty when Biden came in about whether or not he would intend to follow through on that. Well, now it looks like the Biden administration has floated a peace plan, and it has indicated that that deadline is still on the table. And I think that the Biden administration is using that deadline as kind of a lever to try to force both sides in Afghanistan to come to the table and come to an agreement. The peace agreement that the Biden administration has floated calls for a ceasefire, and it calls for an inclusive government, which would include the Taliban. So that's very controversial for the existing Afghan government. So we don't really know what kind of response we're going to get, but it's certainly very interesting to see Biden indicating that he's willing to follow through on Trump's deadline for a full troop withdrawal.
Yeah, kind of a surprise to see any sort of acceptance of Trump foreign policy, especially given how strong the president was during the campaign season. Although he did say that he wanted to get troops out of Afghanistan too. Let's talk about the region more broadly, because we've seen some similarities as well in the Biden administration's approach to the entire Pacific region and sort of the security posture there. Talk a little bit about that, Andrew.
Yeah, again, we've seen some interesting continuity between Trump and Biden. Back in February, the Navy sent a destroyer through the Strait of Taiwan and over to do a freedom of navigation operation, or a so-called FONOP, near one of the disputed islands in the South China Sea, which is a pretty aggressive move. That's something that when Joe Biden was vice president under President Obama, they really avoided those kinds of naval missions, because they didn't want to antagonize the Chinese. But it's something that Donald Trump had encouraged the Navy to do with some frequency. And now it looks like Biden, right out of the gate, is sending Navy ships into these disputed and controversial waters. So again, an interesting continuity between Trump and Biden.
Megan, what's the vibe down at the Pentagon on this? Should we be expecting this to change in coming time, or is this just sort of keeping everything running the way it's been?
There hasn't been any talk of reducing or eliminating those kinds of FONOPs, but in the larger picture, the Pentagon's position about the entire Indo-Pacific has really been about making as many friends as possible, basically, in the region. The last Secretary of Defense spent a lot of time going around to some of those smaller nations and trying to appeal to their leadership in terms of, here's what the U.S. can do to help you guys, and essentially trying to get some of those nations in the America column versus being in the China column. And that is kind of expected to continue into this administration.
Well, we'll keep a close eye on that. There's obviously a lot still to come and a lot more appointments that will affect that. Let's step away from overseas action to something domestic for a moment here. A story that got a lot of attention on our site in the last few days has been about the pink tax, the extra money that women in the military have to spend on uniforms and uniform attachments that men don't. Howard, you've been following this story closely, helping to end a bunch of it. Talk a little bit about what the problem is.
Sure. The Government Accountability Office in a recent study found that there is this so-called pink tax in which women are paying about twice as much as men over the course of a 20-year career for uniform items that they need over this, their career. It's about $8,000 for women, about $4,000 for a man. Part of it is that out of 18 recent uniform changes, 6 were only for women, so that added to it. The Marine Corps told investigators that they are actually paying men to pay for their underwear, not for women. That's changed as a result of this. The Marines are no longer going to pay for underwear, but they will pay for dress shoes. The issue is one of financial equality. Again, women are paying a lot more for their uniforms, and that is, it may change as a result of this investigation.
Megan, the administration has made, equality and especially looking at women's issues in the military, women's issues in the veterans space, a major priority of theirs. Do you think we're going to see more stories like this come out, some more of these inequities, and frankly, just somebody addressing them finally?
Yeah, I do think so. I think the uniform thing is something that women have talked about for a long time. A lot of that has to do with the fact that women just have more accessories generally is what's expected for their uniform. There's a purse that you have to get certain shoes that look a certain way. Some women have pants and skirt options for their uniforms. And there will probably be more things like that. We've seen the Air Force and the Army recently making some big changes to their uniform regulations when it comes to hair, earrings, nail polish, things like that, that are generally catered toward women and something that women have been asking for a long time, wondering why a ponytail, is anathema to readiness, or why wearing stud earrings in the office is unprofessional. So I do expect we'll see a lot more of those changes.
All right, well, we'll be tracking that closely. We'll be tracking all these stories closely. You can read more about them at militarytimes.com. Thank you to my panel, and we'll see you guys next time.